Welcome. I'm Marc Steiner, and welcome to the Real News Network. We continue our third and final portion here of looking at last night's Democratic debate with Jeet Heer from The Nation magazine, the national affairs correspondent, and Dr. Kimberly Moffit from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I'm glad you two could stay and hang out and talk about this. We're going to look at race, reparations, the Green New Deal, and the question of socialism in this campaign. But let us start with the reparations piece and race, and talk a bit about both the high and low marks of how people talked about race in this debate. But let's check out this one brief segment first.
The wealth that we have built, the way we became the greatest country on the face of the planet, was literally on the backs of those who were kidnapped and brought here by force. The legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression is alive and well in every aspect of the economy and in the country today. As president, I will sign into law a new Voting Rights Act. I will focus on education, address healthcare disparities, but I will also sign into law Sheila Jackson Lee's reparations bill so that we can have the national conversation we have waited too long in this country to have.
You are calling for up to $500 billion in financial assistance. What makes you qualified to determine how much is owed in reparations?
Well, first of all, it's not $500 billion in financial assistance. It's $500 billion, $200 to $500 billion, payment of a debt that is owed. That is what reparations is. We need some deep truth-telling when it comes. We don't need another commission to look at evidence. I appreciate what Congressman O'Rourke has said. It is time for us to simply realize that this country will not heal. All that a country is a collection of people. People heal when there's some deep truth-telling. We need to recognize that when it comes to the economic gap between blacks and whites in America, it does come from a great injustice that has never been dealt with. That great injustice has had to do with the fact that there was 250 years of slavery, followed by another 100 years of domestic terrorism. What makes me qualified to say $200 to $500 billion? I'll tell you what makes me qualified. If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 to 5, and they were all promised 40 acres and a mule for every family of 4. If you did the math today, it would be trillions of dollars.
You know, whatever you say about Marianne Williamson, she just cuts gets underneath, as I said earlier. And I think that this is a conversation that America is having a huge difficulty having with itself. So there are two questions here. I mean, and there's a lot of other things here too. So when you look at the issue of race in this debate, I think you also saw people having difficulty with the answers and what they were going to say and how they said. Elizabeth Warren tried to make a list of policy changes she would do that were directed at the poor black community especially, and the people who live in poverty and low middle class folks. And you had Sanders going on about we're going to build up the poor people in this country, including African-American communities, including, as opposed to really kind of understanding the nature of race, which he seems to also have some issues with sometimes, in just understanding. But she got under it. So what does this mean she got under it? What does it mean for the Democrats? What does it mean for America? What does it mean for this election? Kimberly.
Again, I think what Marianne Williamson does for us is she plants the seeds that we then have to deal with, because they start to take hold, and then what we saw in the very first debate is she was the only one that mentioned reparations. And here we are in the second debate, and then you've got half of the candidates starting to talk about it and say, this is what I want to see happen once I am in office. O'Rourke said nothing about reparations in the first debate. And now he's endorsing Congressman Jackson Lee's bill on reparations. So I think she has done a wonderful job of simply planting seeds that then require the other candidates to have to think about what will they say or how will they deal with this issue. She seems to be more well-versed than anyone on that stage on this issue as well. Because, I mean, there was at one point last night that I remember her saying when talking about environmental racism, she said, this is bigger than Flint. And her point in saying that is we've got to not only talk about the fact that they don't have clean water, but why don't they have clean water? Right. And the willingness to talk about race and bigotry and bias and how that then plays out in our policies around the environment, around industries and how they behave among people in particular communities. All of that she was willing to say that other candidates have not been willing to say in real ways, and she's making others have to deal with the issues.
She called the difference between Grosse Pointe and Flint.
Yes.
In her comments. And Jeet, when Kimberly just said planting seeds, it reminded me of what you said earlier about Medicare for all and how that was a seed planted. Now it's taken a hold in terms of people really wrestling with it in America. So your thoughts on that in terms of reparations and race and how it plays out in this coming election?
Sure. I think that, it is the case that many of the Democrats are running away from race because they want to play the traditional sort of coalition politics game. And so to mention race is being divisive. But I think what Williamson gets at is that, Donald Trump is president and he's got to be president and he's running his whole campaign to win again based on unleashing these, which Williamson calls dark psychic forces. and that's exactly accurate. That's exactly what Trump is doing, and you cannot fight dark psychic forces by running away or by not talking about it. You have to confront it head on. So I absolutely agree that she's played a crucial role in these debates.
So, this hits us one more time before we go to the next subject, is America is defined in many ways deeply by race and racism. That defines this nation. And I was thinking what you just said, Jeet, about that. And so it defines it so deeply. The Democrats cannot win without a massive turnout from African-American communities supporting Democrats. The Democrats cannot win without people of color coming out in other communities for the Democrats to win. That's a big question mark. That's part of the reason. That's part of the reason Democrats lost last time. But you also have the reality, as she was saying, and I think she's right about the dangerous psychic nature of race and racism in this country. What it's done to undermine us as a people, and how it plays in the consciousness of America. And how do you think all that's going to play out in this election between now and November? That's what I think it's a critically important subject, but in terms of establishment politics, it's also a dangerous subject. Yeah. So how do you think it's going to play out?
Yeah. Well, I think it really depends on what we see Trump do to up his ante around conversations about race. We've seen
he's pushing the envelope.
He is definitely up against the line, and who knows what direction he will go or how low he can go to continue these types of conversations. But depending on how the Democrats respond to those quips that he makes will really determine whether or not the Democrats are able to garner enough support from African Americans as well as other people of color.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll add to that one of the things that Trump does is he always turns subtext into text. That there's been a long history of American
I love
politicians.
that. That's a great line. Turn the subtext into text. It's a good line. Good line.
There's a long history of American politicians using racial dog whistles, welfare queens or whatever.
Right.
But Trump has realized the power of just saying what you mean, right? Like just saying, go back to where you come from. And I don't think you can fight someone like that by being cowardly. Like I think you have to, if he's saying what he means, you have to say what you mean. And I think one of the things that Williamson is forcing the Democrats to do is to articulate exactly where they stand. And I think that's actually good for the party. Like I think that's the only way to move forward.
And we're curious how this is going to play out tonight as well. In the second debate.
Now that we've got the people of color.
Now we have all the people of color in one room, in one place. On the Democratic side. I think it's something about the way they cut those straws. I don't know what they did, but something very weird. Let's take another piece here very quickly. And Pete Buttigieg, who as much as he likes to hide it, is the son of a Gramscian scholar.
Which I didn't know.
Yes.
It's really
and so, but let's see what he had to say about socialism in this campaign and wrestle with this for just a minute.
It is time to stop worrying about what the Republicans will say. Look,
yes.
if it's true that if we embrace a far-left agenda, they're going to say we're a bunch of crazy socialists. If we embrace a conservative agenda, you know what they're going to do? They're going to say we're a bunch of crazy socialists. So let's just stand up for the right policy.
He's right.
Yeah. It was his best quip of the night. It really was. It really was.
I thought so too. Jeet, what were you going to say?
Oh, yeah, no, I know. He's exactly right. And I think this is one of the reasons why the debate on everything has shifted so much. Like we've actually, Trump has kind of revealed the core Republican values and has sort of shown the value of articulating where you stand. And I'm glad that people are taking that lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I would just say, I mean, you now see or hear the term socialism thrown around. You also hear communism thrown around because those are additional dog whistles that Trump is hoping that brings up what people know, even if it's very little about those two concepts. But just the mention of those two concepts immediately then says, oh, those are not candidates that we want to consider. And so there isn't a lot of literacy around people paying attention to what the policies are that are being presented by a number of these Democratic candidates. It's more so a simpler response to what Donald Trump has already put out there in the ether for people to respond to.
Yeah, and I think that, again, this is interesting. This conversation we've had really makes me think a lot. Both of you kind of use this terminology about planting seeds and where we're going as a nation. And if we survive as a nation, given climate and other things, maybe these seeds will take root and we'll see how that changes the nature of who we are and where we're going. And speaking of that, let's close here with a look at this national green economy. And what was said last night by these candidates, because this goes to the heart of the debate again between moderate, classic liberal, progressives, talking about whether a Green New Deal can work. So we're going to watch what part of the debate was here around the Green New Deal, which is causing so much consternation and conversation about where it goes. So let's take a look at this.
My plan, which gets us to net zero by 2050, which we absolutely have to do for our kids and our grandkids, will get us there. I put a price on carbon, take all the money, give it back to the American people in a dividend. That is a plan that's realistic. It's a bet on the U.S. private innovation economy.
Climate crisis is the existential crisis for our world. It puts every living thing on this planet at risk. So I've proposed putting $2 trillion in, so we do the research. We then say anyone in the world can use it, so long as you build it right here in America.
Well, I think the guarantee for a public job for everyone who wants one is a classic part of the problem. It's a distraction. I share the urgency of everyone up here.
I get a little bit tired of Democrats afraid of big ideas. Republicans are not afraid of big ideas. They could give $1 trillion in tax breaks to billionaires and profitable corporations. So please don't tell me that we cannot take on the fossil fuel industry and nothing happens unless we do that. What do you do with an industry that knowingly, for billions of dollars in short-term profits, is destroying this planet? I say that is criminal activity that cannot be allowed to continue.
Thank you, Senator Sanders.
We have all put out highly similar visions on climate. It is all theoretical. We will deal with climate if and only if we win the presidency, if and only if we beat Donald Trump.
Flint is just the tip of the iceberg. We have an administration that has gutted the Clean Water Act. We have communities, particularly communities of color and disadvantaged communities all over this country who are suffering from environmental injustice. I assure you, I lived in Grosse Pointe. What happened in Flint would not have happened in Grosse Pointe. This is part of the dark underbelly of American society.
So I think this is part of the heart of the matter here, I think, has to do with the issue of what the Green New Deal means. And please correct me if you think I'm wrong, but the Green New Deal in some ways is not thoroughly thought through by the Democrats and what that really means.
That's true.
Because they're being pushed from the moderate side and saying, oh, no, we can't have all these public jobs. We have things since 1933 and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Depression. So that's part of it. Also is the power of fossil fuels and no real idea how you make the change over the next 10 to 20, 30 years so we get rid of fossil fuels. I mean, and then people are nervous because it also means their jobs.
That's right.
Right? It's become a front agenda issue, but it has never been really at the forefront of most people's concerns in this country. So where does it take us? And Jeet, you've been writing about this a bit. Let me start with you, then we'll go to Kimberly.
Sure, yeah. I mean, climate hasn't been an issue, but the CNN put it on because voters actually told them, they took polls, that's what voters want to hear, and it's actually becoming an issue. Because I think everybody is noticing that, like, we're having the warmest July in human history. They're seeing what's happening in Europe and elsewhere. And the other thing is, I think the Green New Deal, I mean, it's not been defined, but it really is like, if we're going to have to make big changes, and they should be changes that take everybody along and take workers along, and they shouldn't be changes that hurt some people more than others, because that's traditionally what big changes have done. And so I think that the big divide is between those who recognize the nature of these big changes that are coming, and those who want to sort of tinker with the system and think, I think Ryan was the guy that was in love with batteries. That thinks, if you can just come up with a few good batteries, everything will be okay.
Well, batteries are part of the answer. So,
but they're part of the answer. But it's really the guy was like batteries. I thought he was going to marry a battery at the end of the day. I don't think that's the only solution.
Kimberly?
I think this is an issue that shows the divide between the candidates because the Green New Deal has not been thoroughly defined.
Right.
But I also think it's because many of the candidates recall some of the efforts and attempts that Obama tried in his 2 terms. His attempt to, retrain individuals who are part of the coal industry and give them opportunities in other industries. And the fact that a number of those individuals pushed back and didn't want to be a part of this new industry, believed that he was simply taking their jobs away, it's caused a tremendous amount of tension. And I think candidates are wary of staking a claim quite yet to figure out how that will impact their voter base.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most critical issue in terms of what's facing the future in our planet. And we can never deal with racism and the oppression of poor people if we don't have a planet to live on. Yeah. And that's this interplay here, and so this becomes a critical issue. And at Real News, by the way, folks, we're going to be covering this in some intensity, as you know. It's a major issue here at Real News to cover, and we're using this as part of our work with Real News, and people like Darna Noor and others to really focus in on this issue in this campaign. And I want to thank both of our guests here, Jeet Heer, Dr. Kimberly Moffit. Thank you both for being here. This has been a great conversation.
It's great to be here.
Good to have you both here. And I'm Marc Steiner here for the Real News Network. Thank you for joining us. And please let us know what you think and give us your ideas about covering this presidential election, what you think we missed and what you think we need to go to. I really want to hear about that. So again, thanks for joining us and take care.